Sean Diddy Combs, known variously as Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, and simply Diddy, built one of the most successful entertainment empires in hip-hop history. As the founder of Bad Boy Records, he launched the careers of artists like the Notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, and Maze, while simultaneously maintaining his own successful music career. His business ventures extended far beyond music, encompassing fashion lines, spirits brands, and media companies. By the mid-2020s, Combs had amassed a fortune estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars and wielded enormous influence in the entertainment industry. However, on September 16, 2024, that empire came crashing down when federal agents arrested the 54-year-old mogul at a New York City hotel. The arrest marked the culmination of a federal investigation that had been building for months, sparked by explosive allegations that would ultimately unravel Combs' carefully constructed public image. What followed was a harrowing legal saga that saw Combs spend nearly 13 months behind bars, face a grueling criminal trial, and narrowly escape a violent attack while incarcerated at one of America's most notorious federal detention facilities.
The beginning of the end for Sean Combs can be traced to November 16, 2023, when his former girlfriend, singer Cassie Ventura, filed a civil lawsuit in Manhattan federal court that sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Ventura, best known for her 2006 hit Me and You, had been in an on-and-off relationship with Combs for approximately a decade, from 2007 to 2018. Her lawsuit painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse, control, and exploitation. In her complaint, Ventura alleged that Combs subjected her to repeated physical violence, controlled every aspect of her personal and professional life, and introduced her to a lifestyle characterized by excessive alcohol and substance abuse. Most shockingly, she accused him of rape and of forcing her to participate in what Combs allegedly called freak-offs, elaborate, drug-fueled sexual encounters where she was coerced into having sex with male sex workers while Combs watched, masturbated, and filmed the encounters. According to Ventura's testimony, which would later be heard in federal court, these freak-offs were not isolated incidents but rather a systematic pattern of abuse that lasted years. She described how Combs would arrange these encounters in hotel rooms, often lasting days at a time, and how she felt powerless to refuse due to his control over her music career and her life. Ventura testified that Combs used these videos as potential blackmail material, ensuring her silence and compliance. "I just feared for my career. I feared for my family," Ventura later testified during Combs' criminal trial. "It's horrible and disgusting. No one should do that to anyone." The lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, with Ventura ultimately receiving $20 million in the settlement. However, the damage to Combs' reputation was irreversible. The lawsuit opened the floodgates, and other women began coming forward with similar allegations of abuse and exploitation. More critically, the detailed allegations in Ventura's lawsuit provided federal investigators with a roadmap for a criminal investigation. In the months following Ventura's lawsuit, federal investigators with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI intensified their investigation into Combs' activities. The scope of the investigation was extensive, examining allegations spanning back to 2008. Investigators conducted raids on Combs' properties in Los Angeles and Miami in March 2024, seizing computers, phones, and other electronic devices that allegedly contained evidence of his criminal activities. During these raids, federal agents reportedly discovered extensive documentation of the freak-offs that Ventura and other women had described. This included videos, photographs, text messages, and financial records showing payments to male sex workers and the purchase of supplies allegedly used during these encounters. Investigators also uncovered evidence suggesting that Combs used his business empire, including security staff, household employees, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors, to facilitate, coordinate, and cover up his alleged criminal activities. The investigation revealed a pattern of behavior that prosecutors would later describe as a persistent and pervasive pattern of abuse toward women and other individuals. Witnesses came forward describing how Combs' employees would book hotel rooms, arrange for male sex workers, and ensure that large quantities of drugs and other supplies were available for the freak-offs. Some employees allegedly helped clean up after these encounters and worked to suppress any evidence that might emerge. Perhaps most damning was video evidence from a 2016 incident at a Los Angeles hotel. Security camera footage showed Combs violently assaulting Cassie Ventura in a hotel hallway, dragging her, kicking her while she was on the ground, and throwing objects at her. This video, which would later be shown to the jury during his trial, provided incontrovertible visual evidence of his violent behavior. Ventura would later reveal that she received a $10 million settlement from the hotel over this incident, separate from her settlement with Combs. On the evening of September 16, 2024, federal agents arrested Sean Combs at the Park Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan. The arrest came after a grand jury returned a sealed indictment charging him with serious federal crimes. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams announced the charges the following day, revealing that Combs had been indicted on 3 counts: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The indictment painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that Combs allegedly operated through his various business entities, collectively known as the Combs Enterprise. According to prosecutors, Combs used his employees and associates as intermediaries to carry out, facilitate, and conceal abuse and commercial sex acts. The racketeering charge suggested that Combs' business empire was essentially a criminal organization designed to enable his alleged crimes. The transportation to engage in prostitution charge related to allegations that Combs had transported women and male sex workers across state lines for the purpose of engaging in prostitution, specifically, the freak-offs described in Ventura's lawsuit and corroborated by other witnesses. The sex trafficking charge was even more serious, alleging that Combs had used force, fraud, or coercion to cause women to engage in commercial sex acts. Following his arrest, Combs appeared in federal court and pleaded not guilty to all charges. His legal team immediately sought to have him released on bail, offering a $50 million bond package that included his Miami mansion and his mother's home as collateral. They argued that Combs was not a flight risk and that he should be allowed to await trial at home under strict supervision. However, federal prosecutors vigorously opposed Combs' release, presenting evidence of his alleged dangerousness and flight risk. They pointed to witness tampering concerns, noting that Combs had vast financial resources and international connections that could facilitate fleeing the country. More critically, they highlighted evidence of Combs' violent behavior and his alleged efforts to obstruct justice. Judge Arun Subramanian sided with prosecutors, denying Combs' bail application. In his decision, the judge cited Combs' own lawyer's words about his violent behavior toward former girlfriends and noted that evidence suggested Combs had continued his illegal activities even as the federal investigation intensified. The judge expressed concern that Combs might intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence if released. With bail denied, Sean Combs was transported to the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn, New York, one of the most notorious federal detention facilities in the United States. MDC Brooklyn has long been criticized for its deplorable conditions, including inadequate heating and cooling, poor medical care, frequent lockdowns, and violence among inmates. Notable former inmates include R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell, and numerous high-profile gang members and organized crime figures. For a man accustomed to luxury penthouses, private jets, and five-star hotels, MDC Brooklyn represented a shocking descent. Combs would spend the next 13 months in this facility, awaiting his trial and experiencing conditions that his lawyers would later describe as unconscionable for someone who had not yet been convicted of any crime. The conditions at MDC Brooklyn would become a recurring theme in Combs' legal filings as his lawyers repeatedly sought his release. The facility is notoriously overcrowded, with inmates often held in cells designed for far fewer people. Violence is common, with fights breaking out regularly among the diverse population of inmates, which includes accused gang members, organized crime figures, accused terrorists, and white-collar criminals. For high-profile inmates like Combs, the challenges are even more acute. Celebrity status can make someone either a target for violence from other inmates seeking to build their own reputations, or a figure of resentment and hostility. Combs' enormous wealth and fame made him immediately identifiable to everyone in the facility, and his alleged crimes, particularly those involving women, made him especially vulnerable to judgmental and potentially violent fellow inmates. Combs' lawyers revealed in court filings that their client had been placed on suicide watch, a designation reserved for inmates deemed at risk of self-harm. While suicide watch is intended to protect inmates, it comes with its own hardships. Inmates on suicide watch are typically held in isolation, stripped of most personal possessions, and subjected to constant monitoring. According to his attorneys, Combs was required to show identification to guards every 2 hours, and guards would wake him up to verify that he was still alive, a practice that made sustained sleep nearly impossible and contributed to mental and physical deterioration. The conditions at MDC Brooklyn are unconscionable, Combs' lawyers wrote in one of several motions seeking his release. Mr. Combs is being treated like a convicted criminal despite the fact that he is presumed innocent and has not been found guilty of anything. The impact on Combs' business empire was immediate and devastating. With their leader incarcerated and facing serious criminal charges, many of Combs' business ventures began to unravel. According to court filings, Combs was forced to fire approximately 100 employees from his various businesses due to the collapse in his business activities. His lawyers noted that many of these former employees subsequently struggled to find new employment due to their association with Combs, creating a ripple effect of economic hardship for those who had built their careers working for him. Mr. Combs's career and reputation have been destroyed, his lawyers wrote. His life outside of jail has been systematically dismantled. While the conditions at MDC Brooklyn were harsh for all inmates, Combs would face a particularly terrifying moment that highlighted the dangers of life in federal detention. According to court filings submitted by his legal team, Combs was approached by another inmate wielding a makeshift shiv, a crude weapon typically fashioned from sharpened metal, plastic, or other materials available in prison. The incident occurred over a seemingly trivial dispute. Combs had been sitting in a chair that the other inmate wanted. In the confined, high-tension environment of MDC Brooklyn, such minor conflicts can quickly escalate into violence. The inmate, angry that Combs was occupying what he apparently considered his chair, approached Combs with the improvised weapon in hand, ready to attack. For most people facing such a threat, the natural response would be panic or defensive violence. However, Combs managed to keep his composure despite the mortal danger. Rather than responding with aggression or attempting to flee, both of which might have escalated the situation, Combs reportedly engaged the agitated inmate in conversation. Through calm communication, he was able to de-escalate the tense confrontation and convince the inmate to put down the weapon. Mr. Combs demonstrated remarkable composure and conflict resolution skills in an extremely dangerous situation, his lawyers wrote in describing the incident. Rather than allowing the situation to escalate into violence, he successfully calmed the inmate down and persuaded him to drop the weapon. This incident highlights both the dangerous conditions Mr. Combs faces at MDC Brooklyn and his genuine efforts to avoid violence. Combs' legal team cited this incident as evidence that their client did not pose a danger to others and should be released on bail. They argued that his ability to defuse a potentially deadly confrontation demonstrated his peaceful character and contradicted the government's portrayal of him as inherently violent. However, prosecutors countered that this single incident did not negate the extensive evidence of Combs' alleged long-term pattern of violence against women. The incident with the shiv was never publicly reported to have resulted in any physical injury to Combs, and it appears that no formal disciplinary action was taken against the inmate who threatened him. However, the event underscored the very real dangers faced by high-profile inmates in facilities like MDC Brooklyn, where celebrity status can make someone a target and where violence can erupt at any moment over the smallest perceived slight. As Combs languished at MDC Brooklyn, his legal team prepared for what would become one of the highest-profile federal trials in recent memory. The trial began in May 2025 at the federal courthouse in Manhattan, drawing intense media coverage and public interest. The prosecution's case would rest heavily on testimony from women who alleged they had been victimized by Combs, as well as documentary evidence including videos, photographs, text messages, and financial records. Cassie Ventura was the government's star witness, testifying over 4 days about her decade-long relationship with Combs. Her testimony was detailed and emotional, describing systematic abuse, control, and forced participation in the freak-offs. She testified that Combs had stifled her music career, using his industry power to control her professional opportunities while simultaneously subjecting her to physical and sexual abuse. The prosecution also presented testimony from another woman identified in court only as Jane, who spent 6 days on the witness stand describing similar allegations of abuse spanning multiple years. Jane's testimony corroborated Ventura's accounts, painting a picture of a consistent pattern of behavior in which Combs used his wealth and power to control and exploit women. Perhaps the most dramatic moments of the trial came when prosecutors played videos for the jury, the notorious freak-off recordings that Combs had allegedly made. While the most sexually explicit portions were not shown to the public or press, jurors were required to watch hours of this material. The videos reportedly showed women, including Ventura, engaged in sexual acts with male sex workers while Combs filmed. Prosecutors argued that these videos were created and preserved by Combs as blackmail material to ensure the women's silence. The defense, led by a team of high-powered attorneys, challenged the credibility of the accusers. They pointed to inconsistencies in their testimony and suggested that the relationships were consensual. Defense attorneys highlighted text messages that appeared to show affection between Combs and his accusers, arguing that these were not the communications of abuse victims. They also emphasized that Ventura had received $20 million in her civil settlement and suggested that financial motivations might have influenced her testimony. The defense further argued that the freak-offs, while perhaps unconventional, were consensual adult sexual activities. They maintained that Combs had not used force or coercion, and that the women had participated willingly. Defense attorneys challenged the sex trafficking charge in particular, arguing that the federal law against transportation for purposes of prostitution should apply only to pimping, not to someone who was merely a consumer of commercial sex. After weeks of testimony and several days of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict on July 2, 2025. In a split decision that surprised many legal observers, Combs was acquitted of the most serious charges, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. These charges had carried the possibility of a life sentence. However, the jury found Combs guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, lesser charges that nonetheless carried significant prison time. The mixed verdict suggested that while jurors had found evidence that Combs had transported women and sex workers across state lines for purposes of prostitution, they were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he had operated a criminal enterprise or used force, fraud, or coercion sufficient to constitute sex trafficking. Legal experts noted that the higher burden of proof required for the racketeering and sex trafficking charges, which required demonstrating a pattern of criminal conduct and coercion, proved difficult for prosecutors to meet, despite the compelling testimony. For Combs, the verdict was a partial victory, but it still left him facing significant prison time. Prosecutors initially indicated they would seek a sentence of 51 to 63 months, approximately 4 to 5 years, based on federal sentencing guidelines for the transportation convictions. However, they later suggested they might recommend a longer sentence, citing the severity of the underlying conduct even if it didn't meet the legal threshold for the more serious charges. Combs remained at MDC Brooklyn following the verdict, now as a convicted federal criminal rather than a presumed innocent pretrial detainee. His sentencing was scheduled for October 3, 2025. Nearly 13 months after his initial arrest. As the sentencing date approached, Combs' legal team filed a detailed sentencing memorandum asking Judge Subramanian to impose a sentence of no more than 14 months imprisonment. Since Combs had already spent nearly 13 months in custody, such a sentence would mean his release within weeks, accounting for good behavior credit. The sentencing memo painted a picture of a man whose life had been utterly destroyed by his criminal conviction and incarceration. His lawyers detailed the collapse of his business empire, the firing of 100 employees, and the systematic dismantlement of everything he had built over decades in the entertainment industry. They argued that Combs had already paid an enormous price for his crimes and that additional prison time beyond what he had already served would be excessive. The memo extensively detailed the harsh conditions at MDC Brooklyn, including the suicide watch protocols, the threat of violence, including the Shiv incident, and the toll that incarceration had taken on Combs' mental and physical health. His lawyers argued that the conditions at MDC Brooklyn constituted punishment beyond what the law intended for someone convicted of the relatively lesser charges for which Combs had been found guilty. Mr. Combs has lost everything, the sentencing memo concluded. His reputation, his career, his businesses, and his freedom have all been taken from him. He has spent nearly 13 months in one of the harshest detention facilities in America, facing dangers and deprivations that no one should have to endure. Justice does not require that he spend additional years in prison for crimes that, while serious, do not rise to the level of the most serious charges for which he was acquitted. Prosecutors, however, filed their own sentencing memo arguing for a lengthy prison term. They emphasized the severity of Combs' conduct, the number of victims, the duration of his criminal behavior, and what they described as his complete lack of remorse. They noted that even after the federal investigation began, evidence suggested Combs continued his illegal activities and attempted to intimidate witnesses. The defendant used his power, wealth, and influence to systematically abuse and exploit vulnerable women over a period of years, prosecutors wrote. While the jury did not find that his conduct met every element required for sex trafficking, that does not diminish the serious harm he inflicted on his victims. A significant sentence is necessary to reflect the seriousness of the offense, promote respect for the law, provide just punishment, afford adequate deterrence, and protect the public. As Sean Diddy Combs awaits sentencing, his case stands as a dramatic cautionary tale about the abuse of power, the exploitation of vulnerable individuals, and the eventual reach of justice. From his arrest in September 2024 to his conviction in July 2025, Combs' fall from grace has been swift and comprehensive. The man who once commanded enormous influence in the entertainment industry now sits in a federal detention cell, his empire in ruins and his future uncertain. The violence he faced behind bars, the threat from an inmate wielding a makeshift weapon, serves as a stark reminder that incarceration equalizes everyone, regardless of their prior wealth or status. In the confined, dangerous world of MDC Brooklyn, a dispute over a chair can become a life-threatening situation, and a music mogul must rely on the same conflict resolution skills as any other inmate to survive. Whether Judge Subramanian accepts the defense's argument for immediate release or sides with prosecutors seeking a longer sentence, one thing is clear: Sean Diddy Combs' life has been irrevocably changed. The question now is not whether he will face consequences for his actions, but rather how much punishment is sufficient given the crimes for which he was convicted and the suffering he allegedly inflicted on others. For the women who came forward to testify against him, the verdict, while not a complete victory, represented a measure of accountability. Cassie Ventura's lawyer released a statement after the trial saying, "She paved the way for justice." Indeed, without Ventura's courage in filing her initial civil lawsuit, it's unclear whether federal prosecutors would have brought criminal charges at all. As Combs approaches his sentencing date, the entertainment industry continues to reckon with the revelations from his trial. How could such extensive alleged abuse occur for so long without intervention? How many people within Combs' organization knew what was happening and said nothing? These questions extend beyond this individual case to broader issues of power, complicity, and accountability in industries where a few powerful figures wield enormous influence over the careers and lives of others. The final chapter of Sean Diddy Combs' legal saga will be written on October 3, 2025, when Judge Subramanian announces his sentence. Whatever that sentence may be, it will mark the end of one of the most spectacular falls from grace in modern entertainment history, from celebrated hip-hop mogul to convicted federal criminal, from penthouses to a cell at MDC Brooklyn, from untouchable industry titan to a man whose empire crumbled under the weight of his own alleged actions. The makeshift weapon wielded by an angry inmate over a disputed chair serves as a fitting metaphor for Combs' broader downfall. Power and privilege offer no protection when the walls close in, and even the most carefully constructed empires can be threatened by the smallest miscalculation. In prison, as in life, actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences arrive with terrifying swiftness.